Good evening, everyone. I trust you can all hear and see my screen. If you can hear me, can you do me a favor and type yes in the question box? We'll pause for a minute or so to allow a few more people to log in and join us. Welcome to those of you that have just turned up. We'll get started very shortly, but if you can hear me and see my screen, if you can just type yes in the question box so I know that people can hear and see me. Thanks, Liam. Appreciate that. And Tony, awesome. Glad you can hear and see me. Just while we're waiting, if you can just also let me know whereabouts you're joining this webinar from. If you're New Zealand based, if you can put the town or city, or even if you're Australian based. And if you're from overseas internationally, if you can put your country or maybe your state. So welcome, Liam. We've got Taupo and we've also got Papamoa represented with Tony. Good to hear. Good, strong Kiwi contingent at this stage. And good to see you here as well, Di. So we'll get started in about a minute. But just as we're getting sorted, if you can make sure your phone is turned off and other web pages are all closed down to avoid distractions during the webinar like Facebook. That way you can get maximum out of the webinar. And if you can also hold your questions until the end, that way they can all come through consolidated and I can take the time to answer them fully. And besides, I might answer your question as part of the webinar. So welcome to those that have just joined us. If you can just let me know whereabouts in the world you're from. If you're from New Zealand or Australia, feel free to let me know which city or region you are from. Okay, so tonight's webinar is how to enhance your functional threshold power over winter. Going to be covering off a few things: structure your winter, determine your training intensity, and key sessions that you should be doing in each phase. So who am I? I'm a professional triathlon and cycling coach. I've been coaching professionally since 2000. I specialise in recreational and beginner athletes. I've coached plenty of people to finish half Ironman events and cycle events, particularly around Taupo and Great Pride, but also the Able Tasman Cycle Challenge, as well as plenty of triathletes that do Ironman and longer distance events. I don't just coach anyone, work quite closely with my athletes to make sure they're going to be a good fit for the team and make sure they work to achieve their goals primarily. You need to be driven and focused on achieving your what success means is different for each person. As an athlete, I've done round Taupo, I can't think how many times now. I've also done the Able Tasman Cycle Classic and Great Pride, and I've also done 6 Ironman and challenge events amongst my many athletic endeavours. This is me here and my partner. That's on a run last year. Myself and my daughter. Next slide should be my daughter. Oh, don't tell me, computer is crashing. Got to love Microsoft. Bear with me while I get that back. Looks like it's coming back. So anyway, the next is going to be a picture of myself and my daughter. We'll just flick through these quickly. So that's myself, my daughter, up in the hills. She loves getting out into the great outdoors, and so do I. And there's me competing in an event a couple of years ago, a half Ironman, that one. Now, do want to touch on one of my athletes who's also online with us tonight, so Di Chesma. Before we get into the bulk. Come on, Microsoft. Hopefully it doesn't going to end up doing this all night. This is going to drive me crazy. Slide, there we go. Let's just flick through these quickly. So there's Di there, and that's with a trophy she won for winning her age group in Iron Mouldy a few years ago in 2012. She hasn't just done Iron Mouldy, she has done many events, including some ultra long distance cycling events. She's taken part in the Enduros at Taupo. I've spent many a night driving around Taupo supporting her through the witching hour to get her to the finish line, but also the 10 lap at Great Pride, so 1,010 kilometres a couple of years ago. And that was a big challenge, not just for her physically and mentally, but also for the support crew. And we had a reasonably large support crew, about half a dozen of us, that would swap responsibilities and roles so that we could all get some sleep while Di continued riding on. But anyway, moving onwards, tonight's agenda, I'm going to be covering off on three main areas: how to structure your winter, determining your training intensity, and also key sessions you should be using or doing in each phase of training. Oh, hang on, jumping ahead. Missed out a page there, but a couple of key references that I get most of my information from. Joe Friel's The Power Meter Handbook, and also Hunter Allen and Andrew Cogan's Training and Racing with a Power Meter, primarily the second edition, but I also have got the first edition sitting right beside it. Another good book that I refer to, particularly for the heart rate side of things, is Chris Carmichael's Training Tips for Cyclists and Triathletes, and he's also got another great book, and the name escapes me right now, but it's linked through in the end of this. So John Humphreys, another client of mine, he completes in ultra distance events, so Ironman triathlons he uses as a warm-up and as part of his taper for the Ultraman event in Australia, which involves a 10k swim and a 145 kilometre ride on day one. On day two, it's a 285 kilometre bike ride, and then on day three, a double marathon. And so I've been over in Australia supporting him on that, and also helping keep his fitness moving forward as he continues to prepare for these sort of events. Anyway, how to structure your winter. I basically split any build-up for an event into four key phases: the foundation and injury prevention phase, and I often just refer to that as the FI phase. After that follows with the early quality phase, or the EQ phase, then into the transition quality phase, and then finally leading into whichever event you're training for is the final quality phase. Now in the FI phase, that's where we're focusing on your body, preparing your body for what it's going to be moving into first. So we're building up training, adding a little bit more, preparing the body to absorb the training load that we'll give it later on. The biggest loads will come during the early quality and transition quality phase. And if we try and give the body maximum training load early on, we're going to end up injured and broken. So it's important that you build into that progressively. After the foundation injury prevention phase, we move into the early quality phase, and that's where we start introducing the higher intensity training. In particular, we put a bit of a focus on strength training, but I'll touch on that a little bit later on. From there, we're moving into the transition quality phase, and the training becomes more specific, particularly around intensity, but we might also have some higher intensity work to build the top end capability of your body. And then as we get into the final quality phase, and that is where we do the final preparation for the event. So during the FI phase, it's where we're building the duration. We're just training a little bit longer each week, building that fitness up, progressively overloading the body. The main emphasis here is building an aerobic base. After that, we move into the EQ phase, where we continue to build the duration, getting longer and longer for the long rides, but also the accumulated load during the week. And we continue that aerobic base building. We're also introduce hill reps to add some strength into the legs and get that built up and developed. Once we've built that strength, we can add speed onto the system a lot more effectively and get more out of that speed training. As we move through, we move into the transition quality phase, or the TQ phase, and we might continue building the duration, but not as much as the jumps previously. We're getting to the peak of it here, and we also, and as a result of that increasing duration, we're continuing to build the aerobic base. We're not trying to just get you doing ultra long mileage. We're just trying to get you to maximize the efficiency of the heart and lungs with that base. We'll definitely be including some threshold intensity work during this phase, and maybe even some VO2 max work, depending on what your goals are. As we move through into the final quality phase, we're doing threshold intensity work and maybe some VO2 max work as well, once again, depending on what your exact goals are. And the specificity of the intensity for the event is being incorporated as much as possible as well. Throughout the program, we might be including other sessions, particularly flexibility, to help maintain muscle suppleness, prevent overuse injuries, and also assist with the recovery. The strength sessions are very supplementary in nature. We're trying to add that on as an icing on the cake to build off the bike strength. Now, we can build strength on the bike, but we can also do it in the gym. And some people get a lot of benefit from that, especially if you've got the time to do extra training. If you don't have the time to do extra training, then the strength sessions can be the straw that breaks the camel's back, but they can also be very beneficial, particularly with older athletes, help maintain bone density. Just on the flexibility sessions, really good and advantageous to include them. Real good benefit to assist with recovery, and important to have that rest day in the training program, so you're not riding all day, well, not all day, but riding every day of the week. Okay, another athlete of mine, Lisa Rogers, I've got a quote here from her, and she says, "I just want to say thanks. It wasn't until I progressed through the race and experienced all the highs and lows that your advice really kicked in. Before the race, I didn't know I could do it physically, and that was my worry. From the training program, though, I was very well prepared. The biggest challenge, though, that you don't really appreciate until you're in the situation is the mental one. Your coaching gave me down-to-earth, pragmatic advice. Rain is, after all, liquid sunshine. And for all those doubts and fears I had at some point during my training program, I'd experienced them to such an extent that I was no longer scared of them. Throughout the program, you gave me advice that built my confidence and resolve to get you to the finish line. You coach me to finish knowing that training is just a small part of my life, and I have a whole life with kids and work, etc. to manage. Your coaching is not just a physical program, but a program that considers the whole person and their circumstances. I ended up having an inner confidence to conquer stuff. In the end, the whole race and lead up to it was the culmination of physical and mental endurance, determination, and calm. As we move on, we're going to look at how to determine your intensities. Now, for those of you that are training with a power meter, and if people are out there training with a power meter or a heart rate monitor, if you can just type that into the into the question box, let me know. So I know roughly, and if there's more people with power meters, I'll put a bit more emphasis on power meters. And if there's a large number of people with heart rate monitors and using that for the intensity, then I'll put a bit more focus on that. So thanks, Liam, for letting me know you train with heart rate monitor, and Tony training with both. Chris, thank you. Heart rate. Renate, heart rate as well. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. Okay, it looks like the majority of you using heart rate. I'll quickly brush over power, but I won't reduce the content there because Tony, and there might be other people that haven't or can't comment. But anyway, power is the gold standard. And the reason for that is because it's actually a measure of, no worries, I'll just call you Ren. That's no problems at all. So power is the gold standard, and that's because power is actually a measure of your output. It's the intensity that you're delivering, the effort you're putting in. Whereas heart rate is the body's response to that effort that you're putting in. And it might take some time to represent that. And if you think of a situation where you're standing around not doing much and then go for a hard sprint, the heart rate will start climbing up, but it won't jump straight to the effort you're putting in. And that's because heart rate takes a while to respond. Power, you'll see the power numbers increase on the head unit straight away, delivering whatever output you're delivering. The other problem with heart rate is it's quite temperamental. Your heart rate at a given intensity on any day can vary from day to day. It could be or vary based on a range of factors: how well recovered you are, quality of sleep you've had, how well hydrated you are, whether you've got any stimulants on board such as caffeine or something less legal, levels of fatigue. They all impact your heart rate. Temperature, environmental temperature. There's a range of things that are going to impact heart rate. So heart rate will work, but it's not the perfect solution. Thanks for letting us know, Carlos, both heart rate and power. And now, so that's power and heart rate. Though power's by far and above the best way to go, but it's also very expensive compared to heart rate monitors on the market these days. Heart rate monitors are good, but nowhere near as good as power, but they're both a lot better than a very subjective measure such as the Borg scale, which is the 0 to 10 scale. There's an older version of the Borg scale that went from 6 to 20. The other things you can use are speed and that sort of thing, but that can be very terrain and environment based. So they're not even worth really considering or discussing. So the big three: power, heart rate, Borg scale, or rating of perceived exertion, in that order. So if we look at a functional threshold power test, start with a 10-minute warm-up, do some primer intervals, 3 by 1 minute with some 30 seconds recovery. And I'll talk about the levels a little bit later on when we get into deciphering the numbers. After the primer intervals, we do 5 minutes, basically as hard as we can, pre-fatigue the body a little bit, then have a 10-minute recovery, just nice gentle riding, keeping the cadence up above 90, and then a massive effort, 20 minutes, level 4 or even higher if you can maintain your effort nice and high, maximizing the distance and the amount of effort you put in for that 20 minutes, and then finish the session with a cool down. Afterwards, look at what your average power was for the 20 minutes and take 95%, and that's going to be your functional threshold power. and that's the number that you'll work with to determine your training zones. For the majority of you that are using heart rate monitors, you can do something similar to generate similar results a little bit more easily. And I used the Carmichael field test. And this was popularized in the early 2000s by Lance Armstrong's coach, Chris Carmichael. Despite the pharmaceutical support Lance Armstrong had, the coaching support was also top-notch, and Chris Carmichael is a very knowledgeable coach. So basically, after a warm-up, you do 2 8-minute intervals as hard as you can with a 10-minute easy ride or rest interval in between, just cruising along at level 2, keeping that cadence up nice and high to flush out that lactic acid. So at the end of the cool down, have a look at the data and take the average heart rate from each of those 5 minutes, and whichever one is the highest, take that as your threshold heart rate. It's going to be very close to it. Has anyone done this test before or done something similar? Hey, thanks, Carlos. Welcome from Ireland. Tony, you've done a similar test before. Other ways of doing this, doing a 20 to 40K time trial, depending on your level of ability, and taking the average that you can sustain for just under an hour is another good way of getting a similar result. Liam, you've used the Trainer Road test. Trainer Road, they've recently just released a new test that they utilize. And Carlos, you've done an FTP test before. Nice. Well, not necessarily nice, but it's great that you've done it. The test itself, for those that haven't done it, it's quite a mental and a physical challenge to work through. Okay, so once you've got these numbers, we need to convert them into get the intensities. And Liam, I just see that you've done the 2 by 8 minute previously as well. So with the training intensity zones, I calculate my training zones a little bit differently from Chris Carmichael, but they're very aligned with what Andy Cogan utilizes. So for those using power, the bulk of your rides are going to be done, or regardless of whether you're using power or heart rate, the bulk of your rides are going to be done at the level 2 or endurance zone. And for power, that's between 56 and 76% of your functional threshold power. For those using heart rate, I like to use 69 to 83% of the Carmichael fitness test heart rate. So it ends up being a little bit lower, I think, from memory than what Chris Carmichael recommends, but it's a really good intensity to really develop that base and build that nice and effectively. When we move up the intensity levels, 77 to 90% of FTP for level 3, and that equates to about 84 to 94% with heart rate. The threshold zone, between 91 and 105% of functional threshold power, and for the heart rate, 95 to 105% heart rate. So very similar there, and both of them for level 5 is anything over 106% of your threshold. So we're topping out and we're not able to hold it for very long at all. Okay, so before we look at what sort of training sessions we should be including within the different zones, I'm just going to introduce you to Cindy. She is an Ironman athlete, and she was a first time when I coached her, and I've got a wee quote here from her. And as a first timer and relatively new to the sport of triathlon, Ray provided me with the expertise, advice, and training plan to get me not only to the start line, but also to the finish line of my first half Ironman. His input was invaluable, and I would highly recommend all those first timers to consider seriously using the services of Qwik Kiwi coaching. So within the foundation injury prevention phase, the training sessions are pretty much, dare I say it, but they're the most boring sessions. but it's important that you build that base, develop that fitness, and progressively overload the body just by building up the amount of time in steady state level 2 and build the duration. As we move through into the early quality training sessions, we also continue to include steady state level 2 sessions, building them up a little bit longer. But as we start to include the intensity, some hill rep sessions are a really good way to go. One of my favorites to include hill reps, build that strength up. And one example here is a 4x5 minute big gear hill reps at level 4, keeping a cadence of 60 to 70 RPM, but then only having a 1 minute rest interval at level 2, where you continue to pedal at a lower resistance, spin the legs out at above 90 RPM before repeating it. This session here is really good to do on a trainer, but you can also do it on a hill that's not too steep. You need to be able to get it into the big chain ring and really get on top of that gear and just keep chugging away at that 60 to 70 RPM for that good 5 minutes. The slow turnover is really good for developing the fast twitch muscle fibers that really fire up when you put a lot of force through the legs. And so these hill reps and the big gear are a really good way of doing that. These links that I've got in here, I'll send through via email after this so you can have a look. But I've just used the short links so they're easier if you are frantically trying to copy them down. Moving on to the transition quality phase, building those longer rides in, and I like to include some intensity in those longer rides as well for my athletes. And this might be the stage where we start including some VO2 max intervals, depending on what the goal of people is. And a really productive session that develops a lot, it's 6x4 minutes, but you really need to make sure you're getting in that real top end of intensity, maximizing the effort above that 106% and spending as much time working at that level as you can within those 4 minutes. If you're lasting 4 minutes, it's probably right on the limit of your capability. If you can keep going past that 4 minutes comfortably, you're not doing it at high enough intensity and you need to up the effort level. And as a result of that, you need a good 4 minutes to recover, just spinning the legs out, real low intensity, 90 RPMs and above. And once again, I've got that link there for you. As we move into the the final quality training phase, we continue with some steady state rides, and also in the longer ones, I still include some higher intensity efforts. One of the key sessions I like to include at this phase is my quad crusher series, and there's 4 of them in it of different durations. But the key thing is here we're primarily targeting the threshold heart rate or threshold power zone at level 4. But within that period, whether it's 10-minute or 15-minute intervals, and the example I've got up here is 3 by 10 minutes, every 2 minutes in that period, you're standing up on the pedals, you're tacking for 12 to 15 pedal strokes, and then settling back down, getting back into that rhythm. And it's really effective, particularly at really peaking and spiking the functional threshold power towards the end and get the most out of the body. After those efforts, you need a good 10 minutes just cruising, level 2 intensity in between. So another example here of one of my athletes, and this is Joe, and Joe says, Ray has taught me how to train smarter rather than harder. I'd heard this throwaway phrase before, but now I know what it means and have proven it works. His knowledge and ability to share the reasons behind the workouts makes it much easier to put your trust in him and allows him to get the best out of you. Thanks, Ray. So that has covered off on everything I want to cover. We'll move into the questions now. But just as you're thinking of your questions and writing them in the question box, just got some training sessions there, a 16-week FTP boost, training plan, and also a 6-week FTP training plan. And I've got a special for tonight. Get 25% off by going to that link there, typing in webinar as a discount code, and you'll get 25% off. Also from that link, I've got a couple of Amazon links to those books I mentioned at the start. So if you've got any questions, feel free to type them in the question box, and I'll just stay online and answer them whilst they keep continuing to come in. I trust everyone had enjoyed the information I presented tonight, and happy to answer any questions. If you want to connect with me on Strava or Facebook, nice and easy to find. If you just on Facebook, just go Coach Ray /Qwik Kiwi, and I'll come up. And just make sure you spell Qwik Kiwi uniquely. Qwik is how Qwik is spelt and for my business. And on Strava, if you just search for Qwik Kiwi once again, Instagram, Coach Ray or Coach_Ray_NZ. And also my website is coachray.nz. Hey Humps, just got your message there. Sorry mate, busy night, just managed to get your laptop to log on. Looks like I wasn't the only person having computer problems earlier on. Glad you can make it and catch the end. There will be a replay available. I have got this recorded, and so I can send a link out to everyone regarding that. So if people do have questions, feel free to type them in the question box. I'll stay online and I'll answer them. No worries. Yep, I'll definitely send that link through. Probably be a little bit later on that I get that sent through, but I'll send it through this evening. And if you're over in Ireland, I suspect it's this morning over there. No worry, Liam. I do a range of these. I try and do one a month. Sometimes I sneak in a couple a month. Are you a cyclist or a triathlete? I don't always do them based around cycling. Sometimes there's a bit of a focus on swimming or running or purely towards triathlon. But often when I do them purely on triathlon, cyclists or the single sport athletes can get benefit as well. Let me know if you're a cyclist or a triathlete there, Liam. Hey, Ren. Yes, definitely. I'll include that in the email that goes out to everyone there, Ren. The discount link. Yeah, just go straight through to my website. On there, I've got links through to the training plans and also the books that I talked about at the start. Hey, Tony, I've just had a notification come through on my watch that you found me on Strava and started following me. I'll follow you back, but I'll do that once I get off the webinar. Hey, thanks for joining us, Carlos. That's no problems at all. Enjoy your day. Hopefully you get a chance to get out and ride if you haven't already. Thanks for joining us, mate. Hey, Ren, first Iron Mouldy, nice. I've coached a number of people for Iron Mouldy. I do actually have a Iron Mouldy specific program coming up. It's not one of the ones linked into the web page there. What I'll do is I'll send the details separately directly to you. No worries, Carlos. I'll get that replay sent through to you. Chris, thank you. Ren, cool, thank you. You're both welcome. The other thing I didn't mention before when I was talking about my Facebook and Instagram and Strava is my website, www.coachray.nz. Every Wednesday morning, I publish I call it my Wednesday wind trainer workout, but you can do most of them on the road as well. So every Wednesday morning, there's a cycling specific workout, gets posted up there. And you can also go through all the archives and get all the old ones. So there's nearly coming up 3 years worth of publishing. Actually, it'll be 3 years at the end of July that I've been publishing a weekly workout on there for cyclists every single Wednesday. So there's a lot of I'll call them back issues or back previous workouts that you can download and utilize for free. No worries, Tony. And just for everyone else's reference, I'll send an email to all of you with the replay link once I've got that all processed, and that will be up and loaded. And glad that you enjoyed it. I see the majority of you are still online, so if you do have any questions, feel free to ask away. I'll stay online whilst the majority of you are still there, but as we start to drop down, then I will say good night. So I haven't had any questions. Oh, open my mouth too soon. Thanks, Humps. Good night to you as well, mate. Hopefully you sleep well this evening. I know the challenges you have with that, so all the best. I'll stay online for another 30 seconds if anyone else has any more questions.